The rain had been falling since dawn, thin, cold, persistent, like the kind that doesn't soak your clothes right away but somehow seeps into your bones. Montana was always like this in late autumn: gray skies, long silences, and roads that looked like they led nowhere. Amy Hart pulled her hood tighter. Her hands were cracked, the skin on her knuckles pale and cold. She stood among a small crowd gathered in front of the county courthouse, men in denim jackets, a few ranch owners, a woman holding an umbrella that looked too expensive for this town. Next to Amy stood a boy, 8 years old, wearing an oversized jacket that used to be hers. Noah. His hair was wet, but he didn't seem to mind. He was looking at something in the distance, maybe at the police car parked by the gate, maybe just at the fog. Beside them, a German shepherd sat quietly, tail still, eyes alert. His name was Rex, her partner from the war, retired now, but still, guarding her like every shadow in her life might turn into a bullet. They didn't belong here. Everyone could tell. Amy clutched the folded $50 bill in her pocket like it was a heartbeat. That was all she had left. $50, no savings, no plan, no home, just a truck parked 3 blocks away, filled with old clothes, 2 blankets, and a tin of dog food. The auctioneer, a thin man with a red scarf and an expression that had long forgotten excitement, began calling out numbers. Lot 17, state property, Riverside Elementary School, located on the east end of town, vacant since 2003. Starting bid $50. The crowd chuckled. Someone whispered, $50 for that haunted wreck. Another laughed. You'd have to pay me $50 just to look at it. Amy looked up. Riverside Elementary. She remembered driving past it once, a building swallowed by weeds, its windows like black eyes. It had been shut down long before Noah was born. $50. It was absurd, and yet her mind went still. For the first time in months, she didn't hear the endless noise of fear, those restless thoughts about gas money, job interviews, or the next meal. She just saw a roof, for walls, a place where Noah could sleep without hearing trucks passing at midnight. Do I hear any takers? The auctioneer said. No one moved. Amy's heart pounded. She could almost hear Rex's slow breathing beside her. She raised her hand. A murmur rippled through the crowd. People turned to see the woman in the army jacket, with a soaked herd and a scar down her wrist, holding her hand up like she meant it. The auctioneer blinked. $50, ma'am. Amy nodded. 50. He looked around, half expecting someone to outbid her out of sheer humor. No one did. Once, twice, 3 times, the hammer came down. Sold for $50 to Ms. Amy Hart. Congratulations, Miss Hart, he said flatly, like congratulating a person who'd just adopted a ghost. He handed her an envelope. Inside it, a rusty key and an old deed stamped Riverside Elementary. The rain grew heavier. People began dispersing, whispering as they passed. Crazy vet. She regretted by morning, Amy didn't hear them. She looked down at the key in her hand, and for some reason it felt warm. Noah tugged at her sleeve. Mom, he said softly, does this mean we have a house? Amy crouched down to meet his eyes. There was a softness in his gaze, innocence untouched by the years of running, of sleeping in motels, of pretending everything was fine. A house, she repeated, forcing a small smile. Maybe not a real one yet, but it's a start, Rex sparked once. As if to agree, Amy stood up, looking across the street where the rain had turned to mist. She could almost see it already, the silhouette of the old school, forgotten and broken, waiting for someone foolish enough to believe it could still matter. She exhaled slowly. Her breath turned white in the cold air. That night, they drove toward the east end of town. The headlights cut through fog, revealing empty lots and rusted fences. The sign at the road's end was barely readable. Riverside Elementary. 1958. Amy stopped the truck. The rain had calmed, but the clouds hung low, heavy and unmoving. She stepped out first. Her boots sank slightly into the mud. Rex followed, sniffing the air, cautious but curious. The building stood in silence, 2 stories high. Brick walls stained black with age, broken windows like missing teeth. The front doors, chained ones, now hung loosely. Noah jumped out, holding the flashlight. It looks huge, he said. Amy smiled faintly. Yeah, it is. The beam of light swept across the hallway. Inside, dust floated like snowflakes in the air. Posters still clung to the walls, faded drawings of apples, numbers, and the alphabet. On the chalkboard, written in faint white, were the words, "See you next year." Amy froze. 20 years had passed, but those words were still there. She whispered, almost to herself. Guess no one ever came back. Rex padded deeper inside, tail low. Noah followed, stepping over broken glass. The sound of their footsteps echoed through the corridors. Amy reached out and touched the wall. It was cold, but solid. Somehow it didn't feel empty. It felt waiting. Noah turned to her, flashlight shaking a little. "Mom," he asked again, "can we stay here, just for tonight?" Amy looked around the cracked floor, the smell of old paper, the wind whispering through the gaps in the window. She thought about the truck, the gas tank almost empty. She thought about the $50 that had left her pocket and turned into this key, this chance. Then she smiled, small, tired, but real. "Yes," she said. "For tonight, this is home." Rex lay down by the door as if guarding the entire place. Amy pulled a blanket from the truck, wrapped it around Noah, and they sat on the floor of what used to be a classroom. The rain drummed gently on the roof. Noah leaned against her shoulder. Half asleep, Amy whispered, almost to the darkness, "Maybe tomorrow we'll start fixing it." Outside, the storm passed. Inside, for the first time in years, she felt something shift, a quiet certainty that maybe, just maybe, broken things could still be rebuilt. And in that cold, forgotten school, surrounded by dust and silence, the sound of breathing theirs and Rex's was enough to make the place feel alive again. The morning light broke through the clouds like shy fingers. Pale and reluctant, Montana's sky had stopped crying, but the world still looked damp and cold. Amy Hart stepped out of the truck, pulling her jacket tighter. The air smelled of rust, wet earth, and the faint sweetness of pine. Ahead of her stood Riverside Elementary, her $50 miracle, or her $50 mistake. The building looked even older in daylight. Red bricks, eaten away by moss and rain, windows shattered, frames rotting like the bones of something that had once been alive. But beneath all that decay there was something else, a pulse, a whisper of what it used to be. Noah ran a few steps ahead, boots splashing in shallow puddles. His laughter echoed against the empty walls. "Mom, look, it's huge." Amy smiled faintly, watching him. It was the first time she'd seen him run like that, without fear, without counting how far they were from the truck. Rex trotted beside her, nose close to the ground. Every few seconds, his ears twitched. The soldier in him was still there, alert, methodical, always scanning. Amy stopped at the entrance. The door's metal hinges were orange with rust. She pushed, and it resisted, then gave way with a long, aching creak. Inside, the air was thick with dust and silence. A hallway stretched out before them, rows of green lockers, paint peeling off like old skin. The floor was a mosaic of cracked tiles and broken glass. Their footsteps echoed softly, followed by the quiet tap of Rex's claws. Amy turned on her flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing posters still clinging to the walls. "Be kind, wash your hands, reading is magic." Time had eaten through every one of them. She felt a strange heaviness in her chest. Not fear, not exactly sadness either, something in between, like remembering a dream she once loved but couldn't return to. "This used to be full of kids," she whispered, running, laughing, learning. Her voice trailed off. The sound didn't echo, just disappeared. Noah tugged at her sleeve. "Did you go to a school like this when you were little?" Amy smiled. "Yeah, smaller though, and warmer." She didn't add the rest, that she hadn't finished school before joining the army, that she'd never had a chance to come back and start again. They walked through a long hallway, turning corners where the air felt colder. On one wall, a faded banner still hung. "Welcome back, students." Noah read it out loud. "Guess no one ever came back." Amy chuckled softly. "Guess not." Rex suddenly stopped, nose pressed against a classroom door. His tail stiffened. He sniffed, then let out a low growl. Amy's instincts sharpened instantly. The soldier's reflex never truly dies. She placed a hand on Noah's shoulder. "Stay behind me." She approached the door slowly, then pushed it open. Inside was an old art room, dusty tables, cracked jaws of paint, a half-collapsed easel. Sunlight poured in through a shattered window, scattering golden flecks through the air. Rex barked once, sharply, then darted toward the far corner. "Noah, stay back," Amy said, stepping closer. Rex was sniffing furiously near a stack of wooden boards leaning against the wall. Amy knelt beside him, brushing away cobwebs. Behind the boards, something caught the light metal, a cabinet. No, an old locker half hidden. Its door was rusted shut. Noah crouched beside her, wide-eyed. "What is it?" "Not sure," Amy murmured, "but looks like Rex wants us to find out." She pulled on the handle. It didn't budge. She tried again, using her weight. The rust screamed in protest before finally giving in with a snap. The door swung open. Inside, nothing dramatic, just a pile of papers, some crumbled photos, a small wooden box, and an old notebook with a cracked leather cover. Noah whispered, "Whoa!" Amy reached for the notebook. The leather felt dry, fragile. She blew off the dust. revealing faint handwriting across the cover. Richards -1972. The name meant nothing to her. Not yet, but as she flipped open the first page, the handwriting, looping, elegant, almost musical, made her pause. It began with, "For the children who will come back one day." Amy closed the book slowly. "For the children who will come back one day." She looked around the room again, the cracked plaster, the fading colors, the quiet echo of a place built to last her. Noah was sitting by the window watching Rex chase his tail in a patch of sunlight. For the first time, he didn't look tired, he looked like a kid again. Amy sat beside him. "This place," she murmured, "it's falling apart. But there's something about it, it feels alive," Noah said. "Like it remembers us." Amy smiled faintly. "Maybe it does." They decided to stay in the art room for the night. It had 4 walls, a roof that mostly held, and miraculously one door that could lock. Amy gathered a few blankets from the truck. Noah arranged his small collection of toys by the window to army men and a plastic dinosaur, survivors of many journeys. Rex lay near the locker, head resting on his paws, eyes half closed but watchful. Amy stood in the doorway, looking down the hall. The sun was sinking, painting the school in long orange shadows. She whispered, as if making a promise, "We'll stay here for a few days, until I figure things out." Noah looked up from his toys. "Promise, promise." Outside, the wind howled softly, brushing through the broken windows. Inside, the light dimmed, but the air felt strangely warm. Later that night, Amy sat alone under the beam of a small lantern, flipping through the old notebook. Most of the pages were filled with neat, careful handwriting, lesson plans, notes, short reflections about the children who once filled these halls. But there were also personal entries, memories, dreams. One sentence stood out: "If this place ever falls silent, I hope someone brave enough will bring it back to life." Amy touched the words with her fingertips. Her throat tightened. She closed the book, resting it on her lap. Rex stirred in his sleep, tail twitching. Noah murmured something in his dreams, something about painting the walls blue. Amy leaned her head back against the cold wall, eyes half open. The ghost school wasn't just a ruin. It was a memory waiting to be remembered. And somehow, deep inside, Amy knew this was where their story would start again. The wind had changed that morning. It wasn't cruel anymore. It whispered, soft, curious, like it was trying to tell Amy something. The sun broke through the shattered windows of the art room, scattering gold dust across the floor. Noah was humming quietly, tracing little shapes in the grime with a broken piece of chalk. Rex lay near the door, head raised, ears twitching. Amy sat by the old desk, flipping through the worn leather journal she'd found the night before, the one belonging to Rickis 1972. She couldn't stop rereading the first line, "For the children who will come back one day." The words clung to her like a melody from a dream she didn't remember having. The school was silent but not dead. When Amy walked down the hall, the air seemed to shift. Her footsteps stirred echoes, laughter, whispers, chairs dragging across the floor, ghosts made of memory. Rex padded behind her, nose close to the ground. He stopped every few steps, sniffing the air, tail low but steady. Noah trailed after them, flashlight in hand, the beam dancing across lockers and peeling paint. "Mom, what are we looking for?" Amy smiled faintly. "Not sure. Just exploring, like an adventure." "Yeah," she said softly. "Something like that." They passed the main stairwell. Water dripped from a cracked ceiling tile. The sound echoed like a ticking clock in an empty house. Then, suddenly, Rex froze. His ears shot up and he gave a sharp, low bark, one of his old signals from their days in service. Amy stopped. "What is it, boy?" Rex turned toward the far wall where a massive chalkboard leaned crookedly against the plaster. The board was covered in faded doodles, stick figures, hearts, and words written in childish handwriting. "Mrs. Richards' class." Amy frowned. "Eleanor Richards," she whispered, remembering the name from the journal. Rex winced, sniffing at the base of the board. His tail began wagging in short, eager bursts. Noah's eyes lit up. "Mom, he found something." Amy knelt beside the board, feeling along the edges. It wobbled slightly. She pressed harder. Dust rained down from behind it. Noah grinned. "Let me help." Before Amy could stop him, the boy grabbed one corner of the board and tugged with all his strength. The old nails gave way with a groan, and the chalkboard slid aside, scraping the wall. Behind it, hidden in the dim light, was a small metal locker built right into the wall. It was covered in rust, the color of dried blood. The lock mechanism was jammed with years of corrosion. Amy brushed her fingers across the metal. "Someone tried to hide this," she murmured. Noah crouched beside her. "What do you find inside?" "Only one way to find out." She reached for a metal ruler lying nearby and wedged it into the crack. With a sharp twist, the latch gave a brittle snap. The door creaked open. Inside, the air smelled like old paper and something faintly floral lavender. Maybe. Amy pulled out 3 objects, each wrapped in age and mystery. First, a leather-bound journal, darker and thicker than the one from the art room. Its corners were frayed, its spine cracked. Second, a stack of legal documents, neatly tied with faded string, stamped with official seals and signatures. And third, a tiny golden key, gleaming beneath the dust like it had been waiting. Noah's breath caught. Whoa! Amy held the key up to the light. It was ornate, small enough to fit in a locket, shaped like a heart with a tiny engraving at the tip, R.E. Noah squinted. What does that mean? Amy ran her thumb over the letters. Could be Riverside Elementary, or someone's initials. Rex barked once. As if agreeing or warning, Amy turned her attention to the journal. The first page was yellowed, the ink faded but still legible. A single sentence stood alone, written in elegant cursive. For the one who will make this place live again. Eleanor Richards, 1972. Amy froze. She could almost hear the woman's voice in those words, gentle, hopeful, certain. It wasn't a message. It was a prophecy. She read further. The entries spoke of a teacher's love for her students, how she'd spent her life building something more than lessons, a sanctuary for the forgotten. There were mentions of town meetings, fundraising, community projects. Then, near the end, the tone changed. They say the school will close next year. They say there's no funding, but I can't let this place die. I've left everything I own to a trust one day. If someone cares enough to rebuild it, they'll find the means to do so. I can only hope my message will survive time. Amy turned the page with trembling hands. The next entry ended abruptly, the ink smudged by water or tears. If you're reading this, it means the walls still stand. Then you, whoever you are, you're part of this story now. Amy swallowed hard. She closed the journal, clutching it against her chest for a moment. Noah tilted his head. What does it mean, Ma? Amy smiled faintly, though her eyes glistened. I don't know yet, sweetheart, but I think it's important. She placed the golden key back into the lock, along with the documents, and locked the door again out of instinct, not logic. Something about this secret felt sacred, like she'd stumbled into someone else's heartbeat and didn't want to break it. Rex sat quietly beside her, watching, as if understanding the weight of what they'd found. Amy brushed a lock of hair from her face, her voice barely above a whisper. Eleanor Richards, the name lingered in the air like a prayer. She looked around the room, the dust, the cracks, the broken windows, and yet, under all that decay, she felt something pulse, warmth, purpose, possibility. For the first time since leaving the army, Amy didn't feel lost. Maybe this place hadn't just survived for her to find it. Maybe she had survived for this place. As night fell, she sat in silence, tracing the name on the journal again and again. For the one who will make this place live again. The words glowed faintly in the lantern's light. Noah was already asleep, curled beside Rex, both of them breathing softly. Amy whispered into the quiet, I don't know if I can, Eleanor, but I'll try it. Outside, the wind brushed through the tall grass, humming softly against the brick walls as if the old school had finally exhaled after holding its breath for 50 years. And somewhere, deep within those walls, something stirred awake. The rain had stopped hours ago, but the sound of dripping water still echoed through the broken pipes of Riverside Elementary. A single flashlight flickered inside the principal's old office, its dim circle of light swaying across cracked walls, dust-laden desks, and forgotten dreams. Amy Hart sat cross-legged on the cold floor, her back against the wall. Noah was curled up in a sleeping bag nearby, breathing softly. Rex, ever alert, rested by the door, his ears twitching at every creak of the building. The night outside was silent as silent. Amy turned another page at the old folder, her fingers trembling slightly. The papers were yellowed, the ink fading. Legal seals, signatures, notarized statements from decades ago. Her eyes caught something, a line written in elegant cursive, signed by Eleanor Richards. Should this property ever fall into ruin, let it be reborn through the hands of one who still believes in its purpose. Amy frowned. She brushed off the dust from another sheet. It was a legal addendum, a trust declaration. The words hit her like a lightning bolt. A sum of $5 million is hereby held in trust, to be granted to the rightful owner who restores Riverside Elementary for the benefit of the community. She froze. $5 million. Her breath caught in her throat. For a moment, she thought she'd misread it. She brought the page closer to the light. The handwriting, the seals, the dates, all real. Amy leaned back, exhaling shakily. $5 million. She whispered, almost laughing in disbelief. 5 million for a building I bought for $50. Her voice echoed faintly through the empty hallways. It sounded absurd, like a cruel joke or a miracle. Rex lifted his head, sensing her unease. Amy smiled weakly at him. Don't look at me like that, soldier. I'm just trying to understand if the universe finally ran out of ways to screw me over. The flashlight flickered again, shadows dancing on the peeling walls. Amy picked up the small leather-bound journal. Eleanor Richards, 1972. She opened it gently, afraid the fragile paper might crumble. The first page she saw was written in graceful penstrokes, "To the one who will bring life back to these halls. Remember, it's never the bricks that make a school, but the hearts that dare to dream within them." Amy traced the words with her fingertip. There was something hauntingly sincere about them, as if Eleanor had written not to anyone in particular but to her. The ex-soldier sat there, in silence, her mind drifting through time. She thought of Afghanistan, of endless nights in the desert, when she'd stare at the horizon and wonder what home even meant anymore. She thought of the day Noah was born, the only thing that ever made her believe in beginnings again. And now this broken building, this hidden diary, this impossible condition. She felt the weight of it, not just the money, but the meaning. For years, she had been fighting just to survive. Now, for the first time, someone, even a ghost from the past, was asking her to build. Amy rubbed her temples. A school for the community. She looked at Noah, sleeping soundly, his small face peaceful under the beam of her flashlight. What community? There's barely 50 people left in this town. Her voice softened. And me, I don't even have a home. She stared at the paper again. The words seemed to glow under the light, as if Eleanor's spirit was right there beside her. Maybe it wasn't about practicality. Maybe it was about faith. Amy took a deep breath. The cold night air bit her lungs. Outside, the moon had broken through the clouds, bathing the schoolyard in pale silver. She could see the old swings, swaying gently in the breeze like ghosts of children still playing. She whispered, "If this is some kind of fine, you've got my attention." Eleanor. Rex gave a soft grunt, curling back into sleep. Amy smiled faintly, picking up her notebook, the one she'd carried through deployments, through hunger, through every damn hotel they'd stayed in. She began to write. Not a report, not a plan, just thoughts. Maybe it's not luck that brought us here. Maybe every wrong turn was leading us to this place. A forgotten school, a forgotten dream, and maybe a forgotten soldier too. Her pen paused. The wind rattled the window frame. Amy stared out at the darkness beyond, whispering as if to herself, "What if I could bring it back to life? What if this place could heal more than just walls?" She chuckled under her breath, a sound halfway between exhaustion and hope. Then, as if answering her, a faint creak echoed down the corridor. Amy turned sharply. Her hand instinctively went to the side of her belt where a gun once used to hang, but there was none now. Rex was already up, growling low, staring into the shadows, the sound of something or someone moving in the distance. Amy stood, flashlight trembling slightly. "Who's there?" Silence. Only the wind. After a long moment, Rex relaxed, tail lowering, probably just the building settling. Still, Amy didn't sit down again. She stayed by the window, eyes scanning the yard. The moonlight caught something in the distance, the old school sign, half buried under weeds. Riverside Elementary, where hope begins. She exhaled, her voice barely a whisper. "Hope begins. Guess we'll see." Amy turned back, toward Noah. She brushed a strand of hair from his forehead, kissed it softly. "Sleep, kiddo. Maybe tomorrow we start over." The flashlight dimmed. The old building moaned quietly, as if it too had taken a deep breath after a long time. Amy lay down beside Rex, unable to sleep. Her mind was wide awake, spinning between fear and possibility. In her chest, something she hadn't felt in years, a small steady spark began to glow again. The morning broke gray and quiet over Montana. A faint mist still hung above the small town like breath on a mirror. The world smelled of wet earth and rust, the scent of rain after a long night of thinking too much. Amy Hart drove the old pickup down Main Street, its engine coughing like an old smoker. Noah sat in the passenger seat, munching on a stale granola bar, half asleep. Rex rode in the back, his head poking out the window, nose twitching in the wind. The town was small, barely a few streets, a handful of shops, a diner, a post office, and one weathered law office with a hand-painted sign that read, "Franklin Moore, attorney at Law May," parked by the curb. Stepping out with the folder tucked under her arm, the same one she'd spent the whole night rereading under the flickering flashlight, Noah looked up at the building and asked, "Is this where the money is, Mom?" Amy smiled faintly. "This is where the truth is, kiddo. The money comes later, maybe. She tousled his hair and nodded toward the diner across the street. Go get us to hot chocolates, extra marshmallows. Yes, ma'am. He ran off with a grin. For a moment, Amy just watched him, that small burst of energy she'd somehow managed to keep alive through all the years of dust and uncertainty. Then she turned and pushed open the lawyer's door. The office smelled like paper and coffee and time. Stacks of old files lined the walls, each one labeled in faded ink. The ticking of a clock filled the silence. Behind the desk sat a man in his late 70s, silver hair neatly combed back, glasses perched low on his nose. He was reading a newspaper from a world that no longer existed. When Amy stepped in, he looked up. His eyes were sharp, the kind that had seen too many wills, too many broken promises. Morning, Amy said. I'm looking for Mr. Franklin Moore. You found him, he replied, voice dried but kind. You're the one who bought the old Riverside School, aren't you? Amy blinked. News travels fast. In a town this small, Miss Hart, gossip moves faster than mail. He gestured to the chair. Have a seat. Let's see what kind of trouble you've brought me today. Amy handed over the folder, the trust papers, the diary copy, the photographs she'd taken. Franklin adjusted his glasses and began reading slowly, the kind of careful reading only old lawyers know, weighing every word like it might explode. Minutes passed. Outside, the church bell rang 9 times. Finally, he closed the folder and leaned back. Well, he said, tapping the paper, I'll be damned. It's real. Amy exhaled softly. So I wasn't dreaming. No dream. Eleanor Richards was a real woman, a good one. She believed education could heal broken places. Set up this trust fund with her husband's fortune back in 1972. I helped write the original papers myself. He sighed, rubbing his temple. Never thought I'd see them again. Amy leaned forward. Then it's true. The $5 million. Yes, he said. But there's a catch, a big one. Amy tilted her head. There's always a catch. Franklin opened another drawer, pulling out a faded document sealed with red wax. He laid it gently on the desk. The clause says the trust only activates if the school is restored, reopened, and serving the community within 12 months of ownership transfer. If not, the fund dissolves forever. Amy's face tightened. 1 year. 1 year. She ran a hand through her hair, staring at the yellowed paper like it was a riddle she hadn't yet earned the right to solve. And if I fail, then Riverside stays what it's been for 20 years, a ghost. Silence settled between them. The ticking clock grew louder. Amy stood and walked toward the window. Outside, she could see Noah across the street, waiting for the hot chocolates, humming to himself. $5 million, she murmured, and all I have to do is bring a dead school back to life. Franklin chuckled softly. That's all. Amy turned, eyes clear, determined. I've lived 6 months in the desert with nothing but sand, water, and a promise that my team would make it out alive. You think a few broken walls and a rusty roof are going to scare me? For a second, Franklin just stared at her, the steel in her voice, the quiet fire in her eyes. Then, slowly, he smiled. You're the first person in 20 years to say that. Guess I don't scare easy. No, he said, shaking his head. You don't. But this isn't war, Miss Hart. It's harder. Why? Because this one's fought with hope. Amy said nothing. She just looked down at the papers, again those dry, lifeless lines that suddenly felt like a heartbeat. Frank reached into his drawer and pulled out a small key, old brass, slightly bent. This was Eleanor's office key. She left it with me all those years ago, said to give it to the one who'd believe enough to try again. Amy took the key, its metal warm from his hand. Something about it, the weight, the age, felt sacred. I'll try, she said quietly. I know you will. She turned to leave, tucking the folder under her arm. At the door, Franklin called after her. Miss Hart. She looked back. Eleanor used to say something, maybe it'll help you. A school doesn't need perfect walls. It needs people who still believe in beginnings. Amy smiled faintly. Then maybe it's time this town gets one. Outside, Noah came running up with 2 steaming cups. They added extra marshmallows. Mom, you're a hero, Amy said, taking a sip. The sweetness burned her tongue, grounding her in the cold morning air. Noah looked up at her, curious. So are we rich? Amy smiled, looking toward the distant outline of Riverside School on the horizon, a silhouette of red bricks and broken windows against the pale Montana sky. Not yet, kid, she said softly, but we're about to earn it. Rex barked once, as if agreeing. The pickup rumbled to life, and as it drove off down the lonely road, Franklin Moore watched from his window the soldier, the child, and the dog fading into the mist. He smiled to himself. God help her, he whispered. Maybe she's the one Eleanor was waiting for. The wind off the Montana plains cut sharper now, Autumn was turning to something colder, something that bit the fingertips and hollowed the air. From the hilltop, the Riverside School looked like the ghost of an old world. Red bricks faded to rust, windows shattered, ivy swallowing corners like green scars. It had been forgotten for 20 years, but that morning, smoke rose again from its chimney for the first time since the 1980s. Amy Hart stood in the courtyard, sleeves rolled, hair tied back under a faded military cap. The air was crisp, filled with dust and determination. Her palms were already blistered, but she didn't care. Rex trotted beside her, a piece of wood clamped in his jaw. Noah followed close behind, dragging a small broom twice his size. The three of them, soldier, boy, and dog, looked absurd against the ruin, but they belonged here. Amy's voice broke the silence. "All right, team," she said, surveying the mess. "Mission, Operation Home." Noah saluted with a grin. "Yes, ma'am." Rex wagged his tail, thumping it against an old desk leg. Amy smirked. For the first time in months, she almost felt light. The inside of the school was worse than she'd imagined. Ceiling tiles had collapsed, wires hung like vines, and the floor was buried under decades of dust, papers, and broken glass. The faint smell of mildew mixed with something metallic, old rain and rust. She stepped through it carefully, her boots crunching, one room at a time. She murmured, "Start small." Noah pointed toward a classroom with sunlight breaking through the cracked windows. "That one," he said. "It looks less broken." Amy nodded. "Good eye." They began cleaning, sweeping the floor, patching cracks, pulling out broken desks. Rex followed Amy from corner to corner, occasionally barking at a falling beam or sniffing an old lunchbox left behind by some long-gone child. Amy found a broom handle, snapped it in half, and started prying up rotten floorboards. Her movements were slow, methodical, the way soldiers move when they know pain is inevitable but necessary. The first day passed in silence except for the sound of scraping metal, creaking wood, and Rex's steady breathing. By dusk, they'd cleared one classroom. It wasn't perfect. The windows were still cracked, the walls bruised with graffiti, but it was clean enough to sleep in. That night, they set up a camp stove in the center of the room. A small flame flickered, casting long shadows on the peeling walls. Amy sat cross-legged, stirring canned noodles in a dented pot. Noah held the flashlight steady while Rex lay nearby, tail twitching in dreams. Outside, the wind moaned through broken window frames, sounding like a song only the lonely could hear. "Which smells good," Noah said, peering into the pot. "That's because it's the only thing we've got," Amy teased. He laughed softly, then looked around the empty room. "It's kind of nice," he said, "like camping." But inside, Amy smiled faintly. "Yeah, a little warmer, too." They ate straight from the pot, noodles and broth, shared by three souls bound by hunger and hope. Between bites, Noah's voice broke the quiet. "Mom, if I studied here, would you be my teacher?" Amy froze for a second, spoon halfway to her lips. The question hit something soft, something buried deep beneath the armor of survival. She looked at him, his eyes bright in the lantern light, filled with more imagination than the world had ever deserved. A smile crept to her lips, small, almost shy. "Maybe," she said. "Yeah, maybe I would." Noah grinned, slurping another mouthful. "Cool. I'll be the best student you ever had." "You already are," she whispered. After dinner, Amy spread out a blanket on the floor. Rex circled twice before settling beside them. The night grew colder, and the only warmth came from their closeness, from the fragile peace of knowing, for once, they weren't running. Amy lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling. The old plaster was cracked like veins across the surface, ugly, imperfect, but still holding. In the silence, she thought of Franklin Moore's words: "A school doesn't need perfect walls. It needs people who still believe in beginnings." She breathed deeply, one brick at a time. She murmured. The next morning, Amy started on the roof. The metal sheets were half rusted, the beams weak. She climbed carefully, hammer in hand. Every nail she drove echoed like a heartbeat. Rex barked from below, pacing in circles, while Noah sorted scrap wood from usable planks. "You're doing great down there, Private," Amy shouted. "Copy that, Captain Mum," he yelled back, saluting with a board. Amy laughed, a full, genuine laugh that startled even her. It bounced across the empty halls, stirring the ghosts of the school awake. For the first time, it didn't feel haunted anymore. By evening, the roof was patched. The leaks would still come, but not tonight. They cleaned 2 more rooms over the following days, turning one into a sleeping area, the other into a small kitchen corner. Amy found an old chalkboard, wiped it clean, and drew a crooked sun with the word hope beneath it. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. On the 5th night, a storm rolled in. Rain drummed against the patched roof, testing her work, Amy watched anxiously as the first drops hit the window, then smiled when none fell inside. "We did it," Noah said proudly. "We did," Amy whispered back. Rex barked once, as if to claim credit. They huddled together again. The lantern's flame flickered, throwing soft light across their faces. Dust still hung in the air, but it glittered now like stars caught between the cracks of something reborn. Amy glanced at her son, already dozing against her shoulder, and then at Rex, guarding the door. For the first time in years, she let herself believe this wasn't just survival, this was home under construction. Night fell quietly over Cedar Ridge. The old school, though mended in parts, still whispered with the wind through its cracked windows, beneath the rotting beams. Across the empty halls that hadn't heard laughter in decades, Amy sat by the flickering lantern in her small makeshift room, the one she and Noah had turned from rubble into shelter. Her hands were still covered in dust, her back aching, her breath shallow. She had spent the whole day patching a wall that kept collapsing. Noah had already fallen asleep, his head resting on Rex's side, the dog's chest rising and falling like a soft metronome of peace. Amy stared at the ceiling, her eyelids heavy, and that's when the world changed. The sound of the wind turned into gunfire, the creaking door became the scream of an explosion, and the smell of dust it became the iron tang of blood. She was back there again, in the desert, under the burning sun, her unit surrounded, her best friend calling her name Lieutenant Carter, were hit. Then silence, her silence so deep it could swallow a lifetime. Amy turned, and saw his face torn, fading, but smiling at her, the smile of someone who knew they wouldn't make it home. She screamed his name, but only the echo answered back. Then came the cold nose. Rex. The shepherd's wet snout nudged her cheek. Breaking the spell, Amy jolted awake, drenched in sweat, her body trembling. The lantern flickered, her breath ragged. Rex whimpered softly, his eyes glowing in the dark like amber embers. Amy pressed a hand against his head, her voice shaking. "Thank you," she whispered, "for staying." Rex leaned closer, resting his head on her lap. And for the first time in weeks, Amy allowed herself to cry, not the hot, dry tears of soldiers, but the silent tears of a mother, of a woman who was still learning how to be human again. Morning came gently. The sunlight spilled through the cracks in the boarded windows, painting stripes of gold across the dusty floor. Amy moved like a ghost, her body sore and her mind heavy. Every swing of the hammer felt like dragging her past back into the present. She wanted to stop just for one day, but she couldn't. Something inside her wouldn't allow rest. By noon, her hands were shaking. The hammer fell from her grip. Her knees buckled. Noah dropped his brush and ran over. "Mom." She tried to smile, but her lips quivered. "I'm fine, honey, just tired." He frowned, that sharp little frown she'd seen 1,000 times before, the one that said he didn't buy it. He sat beside her, brushing dust from her sleeve. "Mama," he said quietly, "you told me once that you saved people in the war." Amy froze. Noah looked up at her, his eyes wide, honest, too wise for his age. "Then why can't you save yourself?" The words pierced her, not like a wound, but like light through fog. For a long time, she couldn't speak. Then she reached out, pulling him close, her voice cracking as she whispered, "Maybe I didn't know I needed saving." Noah didn't say anything more. He just hugged her the way only a child can, fiercely, purely, without trying to fix what they don't understand. Rex barked softly, as if agreeing. That night, Amy sat outside the school with a mug of instant coffee, watching the stars blink faintly above the broken roofline. The air smelled of earth and paint and new beginnings. She thought of Eleanor Richards, the woman from the journal, the one who'd once believed this place could heal a town. And for the first time, Amy felt something deeper than duty. Hope, maybe. She thought this was never about money. Maybe it wasn't even about the school. Maybe this was about rebuilding herself, brick by brick, wall by wall. Every nail she drove into that building, every breath she took in that ruined place was a quiet defiance against the ghosts that had followed her home. In her mind, she could still hear the voices of the fallen, but now, beneath them, another voice began to rise, faint but steady, her own. Days passed. The rhythm of work became a kind of therapy. Morning hammer, afternoon paint, evening silence. Noah laughed more often now. Rex patrolled the halls like a guardian spirit, tail wagging proudly each time a new window was fixed or a corner swept clean. Sometimes Amy would pause, watching them, her heart tightening not from sorrow, but gratitude. She had once thought war was the hardest thing a person could survive. She was wrong. The hardest thing was learning how to live again. And as she stood before the cracked, faded sign that read Cedar Ridge Elementary, she placed her hand on the peeling wood and whispered, "Let's start over." That night, as the wind howled through the mountains, Amy dreamt again. But this time, it wasn't of war, it was of children laughing, running through the halls, their footsteps echoing like music. The old building was alive again, sunlight pouring through clean glass, the bell ringing for class, and standing there, in the doorway, was her older, calmer, smiling. When she woke, she didn't cry, she just breathed deeply, fully, like someone who had finally come home. Sometimes, the past doesn't let go because it's waiting for you to turn around and forgive yourself for surviving. The morning mist curled low over Cedar Ridge like a memory that refused to fade. The school stood on the hill, still battered, still half broken, but there was something different now, something alive. Amy wiped the sweat from her brow, staring at the wall she had just painted. The color wasn't perfect, too pale, too uneven, but it was color. After months of gray dust and crumbling brick, it felt like the first breath of life. Noah was humming nearby, dragging a plank twice its size across the courtyard. Rex followed, proudly carrying a hammer in his mouth like he was part of the crew. Amy smiled. For the first time, the sound of her child's laughter didn't feel like an echo in an empty world. Then, from the road below, came the rumble of an engine. A rusted pickup truck climbed the hill, its tires crunching gravel. Amy straightened, wary. Strangers rarely came here. The truck stopped, and 3 people stepped out, older now, but their faces carried that same wide-eyed awe you see in someone who's walked into a place that once existed only in their memories. "Is this Cedar Ridge Elementary?" one of them asked. Amy nodded slowly. "What's left of it?" The man laughed softly. "I'll be damned. I haven't seen this place since 1979. They walked around, running their fingers across the bricks, whispering things like, "That's where Mrs. Richards used to hang the flag. And remember the science fair here?" Amy watched them from the doorway. She didn't interrupt. She didn't need to. Their eyes told the story, the kind you can't rebuild. Only remember. One of the women, her hair silver and pinned neatly behind her ears, turned to Amy. "I saw the lights up here a few nights ago. Thought it was vandals again. Then I realized." She paused, emotion tightening her voice. "You're fixing it." Amy nodded, trying to. The woman smiled. "Then you're not alone anymore." She left, but 2 days later a delivery truck came. Buckets of paint, boxes of brushes, a note taped to one can for the walls that held our childhood. "Margaret Ellis, class of '79. Amy stood in silence, one hand on the can, the other pressed to her chest. Word began to spread like wind through wheat. People started showing up. A retired electrician named George, who hadn't left his house in years, arrived one morning with a toolbox. "Can't stand seeing those old wires hanging loose," he muttered, pretending not to smile. A widow from down the road, Mrs. Lang, donated 2 gallons of white paint leftovers from my porch. "Maybe your walls deserve better than mine," she joked, tears glistening behind her humor. Teenagers came after school, curious at first, then curious enough to help. Soon the hammering, sawing, and laughter began to blend a new kind of music, one Amy hadn't realized she'd been waiting for. She no longer worked alone. Every stroke of paint, every repaired wire, every board nailed down carried a story, a shared heartbeat of a town that had almost forgotten how to believe in itself. By the second week, the place no longer looked like a ruin. It still leaned with age, yes, but now it leaned toward life. Amy would sometimes pause to take it all in, the chatter, the smell of fresh wood, the warm sunlight spilling through the new windows, and every time, she caught herself smiling without meaning to. "It feels different, huh?" said a familiar voice. She turned. Franklin Moore stood at the gate, hat in hand, his weathered eyes taking everything in. Amy laughed softly. "You again." "I had to see it for myself," he said, stepping closer. "You know, I've seen this town give up on 100 things over the years, but this," he gestured around him, "this might be the first time I've seen it wake up." He walked past her, running a hand along the wall. New paint, clean floors, and all this in just a few weeks. "People came," Amy said quietly. "One by one, they just came." Frank nodded, his expression softening. Then, with a faint smile, he said, "You know, Ms. Carter, hope is a strange thing." She tilted her head. "How so?" He chuckled. "It's contagious. One person catches it, and suddenly everyone else remembers they used to believe, too." Amy looked around at Noah sweeping the steps, Rex chasing a piece of cloth in the wind, Margaret laughing with the teenagers painting the hall. "Maybe that's all it takes," she said. "One person to start." Frank smiled again, his voice low. "And one reason to keep going." That evening, the schoolyard glowed with golden light. The walls, once gray and lifeless, shimmered under the setting sun, still imperfect, still cracked in places, but whole in spirit. Amy stood outside, her hands still stained with paint, Around her, laughter rose like birdsong, the sound of something reborn. For a long moment, she said nothing. She didn't need to. The air itself seemed to whisper the words she couldn't say aloud. We're back. Later that night, when everyone had gone home, Amy sat on the front steps. Rex curled beside her. She looked out at the quiet town below, the distant lights twinkling like fallen stars. She remembered the night she'd first arrived here, broken, lost, just looking for a roof to keep the rain off. Now this place had become something else. Not a project, not a job, but a promise that maybe, after everything she'd lost, there was still something worth rebuilding. Sometimes, healing doesn't begin in silence, it begins in the sound of strangers showing up and reminding you that hope was never meant to be carried alone. The night air was colder than usual. Montana's winds carried that quiet, eerie kind of silence, the kind that presses against your skin and tells you something isn't right. Inside Riverside School, the old clock had stopped ticking hours ago. Amy sat by the dim lantern, sorting through repair notes, while Noah slept beside Rex, who lay curled at the foot of his bed, loyal, as always. Then it happened. A soft clang echoed from the hallway. Another, louder, the sound of metal scraping against metal. Amy froze. Years of combat instinct surged back through her veins. Her hand went to the old revolver she kept in her coat. She moved quietly toward the source of the noise. Breath steady, footsteps slow. At the far end of the hall, the door to the utility room stood ajar. A flashlight beam flickered. Shadows moved. Two men, dirty jackets, desperate eyes rummaging through pipes, pulling at copper wires. They thought no one lived here. They thought this place was dead. But Rex knew better. A low growl rippled from the dark. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to make the men turn. One of them raised a crowbar, and then a blur of fur and fury launched out of the blackness. Rex hit him hard, teeth locking onto his sleeve, dragging him to the floor. The other man shouted, swinging wildly. Metal struck flesh. A sharp yelp cut through the air. Rex. Amy's voice shouted the silence. She stepped into the hallway, gun raised, eyes burning. Drop it, she shouted. Now. One of the thieves turned toward her, sneering until he saw her stance. Not trembling, not afraid, a soldier's stance. She fired once, into the ceiling. The sound roared through the hall like thunder. The men bolted, boots pounding, doors slamming open. Then gone, swallowed by the night. Amy dropped to her knees beside Rex. Blood streaked the floor, dark and thick. The crowbar had caught his side. He whimpered softly, his breathing shallow. Amy pressed her hands against the wound, voice trembling. Stay with me, please. Rex, don't you dare leave me, too. Her tears mixed with the blood on her fingers. You've already lost too much. We all have. Noah came running, barefoot, eyes wide with fear. Mom, what happened? Then he saw the blood, the way Rex lay still. His small hands shook as he touched Rex's paw. Don't die, please, don't die. Amy's mind raced. Training took over. She tore strips of her sleeve, pressed them tight, whispered steady words even as her heart broke. He's strong, she told Noah, even though she didn't know if it was true. He's stronger than anyone I've ever met. Hours passed. They sat there, mother, son, and the wounded dog who had once saved soldiers under gunfire and now fought for his own life in an abandoned schoolhouse. When dawn broke, the first light fell through the shattered window, painting Rex's fur in gold. He opened one eye, weakly, then the other. His tail moved just once. Noah gasped, laughter breaking through tears. He's alive. Mum, he's alive. Amy let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. She rested her forehead against Rex, whispering, You did it again, old friend. You saved us. Word spread fast through town. By morning, people came to mechanic who had once refused to help, the grocer who used to look away when Amy walked by, even old Mr. Frank with his cane and his quiet eyes. They brought what they could, blankets, tools, food in silence, heavy with guilt. They saw the blood on the floor, the tied woman, the boy, and the dog who had given everything to guard a place that wasn't even finished yet. Something shifted in that moment. It was no longer just Amy's fight, it was theirs too. Men patched walls, women scrubbed the hallways, teenagers carried wood and painted doors. By sundown, Riverside didn't feel abandoned anymore. It breathed again with footsteps, voices, and life. Amy stood in the doorway, watching them work. Rex lay beside her, bandaged but alive, tail thumping softly against the floor. She whispered, half to herself, half to the wind. Maybe this is how healing happens, not all at once, but one heart deciding to stay when it could have walked away. And as the last rays of light slipped through the broken glass, Amy finally felt at that fragile, impossible thing she hadn't dared believe in for years. Hope. Winter loosened its grip on Montana, and by the time spring crept over the hills, Riverside no longer looked like a ruin. The frost melted into soft soil, grass began to reclaim the once barren yard, and sunlight slipped through the newly cleaned windows like forgiveness. Amy stood at the edge of the playground one morning, watching as the wind danced across the field she had once thought beyond saving. Paint still clung fresh on the walls, pale cream with blue trim, the same colors Eleanor Richards had written about in her old journal. For the first time in years, the air smelled not of dust and rust, but of sawdust, wet earth, and hope. Inside, voices filled the hallways. Children ran laughing through the corridors, their sneakers echoing against the floors where silence had once lived. In the music room, a retired violinist, once a student of Riverside, tuned his instrument for the first time in decades. Across the hall, an elderly woman was teaching Noah how to plant saplings in recycled jugs, and outside, Rex lived across the grass, his fur gleaming in the morning sun. His wound had healed into a faint scar, a quiet reminder of the night he saved them all. Every step he took now felt like a small victory against everything that had tried to break them. Amy walked beside him, one hand resting on his back. Her other hand held a sign, carefully carved and painted by the townsfolk. She climbed the small set of steps, sunlight pooling on the front wall, and nailed it above the main doors. The letters shimmered under the light. Riverside Community Center, where lost souls begin again. When the last nail went in, a cheer rose from the crowd. Children, neighbors, volunteers, and strangers who had once only passed her by on the street. Frank Moore, standing in his brown coat and weathered hat, stepped forward. His cane tapped against the wooden floor as he approached her. He smiled, the kind of smile that comes after seeing something long promised finally come true. "It's official," he said, handing her a sealed envelope. "The trust fund has released $5 million to maintain the center, build programs, pay staff, everything Elena wanted." Amy stared at the envelope, not quite believing it. For a long moment, she couldn't speak. The words felt too heavy, too small for the weight of what had just happened. Frank looked at her gently. "You know, I think Eleanor would have liked you, Amy Hart. You've done more than restore her school. You've given this town its heart back." Amy's eyes shimmered. She swallowed hard, blinking against the emotion rising in her chest. "I didn't do it alone," she said softly. "They all did. Every person who believed this place could still mean something." Frank nodded. Hope tends to multiply when someone dares to show it first. Behind them, laughter burst from the classrooms. The sound spilled into the open air, clear, alive, unstoppable. Noah ran up, his face glowing with excitement. "Mom, come see what we made." He tugged her hand and pointed toward the art room. The walls were covered in paintings, children's hands, bright colors, names written in shaky letters. At the center was a portrait of a woman with kind eyes and a faint smile, Eleanor Richards. Below the painting, a small plaque read, "For those who believe that broken things can still be rebuilt." Amy stood in silence. Her throat tightened. Rex barked once, a deep, proud sound that made a few children laugh. He trotted forward, sat beneath the portrait, and tilted his head as if he understood. Amy knelt beside him, placing a hand over his collar where the old tag still hung. "Rex, K9 Unit. You made it, partner," she whispered. "We made it." Outside, the sun broke fully through the clouds. The building's windows caught the light, scattering it like glass shards turned to gold. Frank leaned on his cane, watching the scene quietly. "You know," he said, "places like this don't just come back to life. People bring them back." Amy smiled faintly. "Tia's catching the sunlight." "Maybe," she murmured, "but sometimes the place saves the people, too." She looked around at the laughter, the music, the smell of paint and soil and life. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like a soldier rebuilding her past. She felt like a mother giving her son a future. As the afternoon light turned warm and golden, Amy walked out to the field with Noah and Rex. The grass swayed around them. The old school bell gleamed again above the roof, polished and whole. Amy tilted her head toward the sky, eyes closed. "Thank you," she whispered to Eleanor, to the wind, to whatever grace had carried her this far. And somewhere in that quiet, between sunlight and laughter, she felt it, the world exhaling, the darkness lifting. Riverside had found its heartbeat again, and so had she. The morning light in Riverside came quiet and gold, the kind of light that hummed softly, like a secret between the earth and the sky. Days had passed since the community center's opening, yet Amy still found herself wandering its halls long after the laughter had faded and the children had gone home. She said it was to lock up, to check on things, but deep down, she knew it was because she wasn't ready to leave. Something about this place still spoke to her. The old office, Eleanor Richards' room, sat at the far end of the corridor. Dust no longer clung to its corners. The cracked windows had been repaired, and the faint smell of lavender, the one that lingered in Eleanor's handwriting and letters, seemed to drift back into the air. Amy stepped inside, a small lamp in her hand. The desk was now cleared, every document sorted and archived. But there, at the bottom of the drawer, wrapped in faded blue ribbon, was something she hadn't seen before. A small leather-bound journal, the same kind of journal Eleanor had used to document her day's meticulous handwriting. Pressed flowers between pages, margins filled with ink smudges, and the kind of quiet thoughts only written when no one is watching. Amy sat down by the window and opened it carefully. Most of the entries were familiar. The early days of Riverside, the children Eleanor had taught, her dreams for a future that never came. But near the very end, one final note stood alone, written in trembling ink, dated only a few days before the fire. It read, "If anyone ever finds this place, don't let it fade again. Let it live not as a memory, but as a promise. Let it breathe, laugh, and heal. Let it be a candle lit against the night." Amy stared at the page for a long while. Her fingers traced the curves of Eleanor's handwriting. She could almost hear her voice, calm, steady, full of quiet conviction, the voice of a woman who had believed in something bigger than herself, the same belief that had somehow reached across decades to her. Amy closed the journal, holding it against her chest. Outside, the last light of afternoon began to fade, spilling across the room in golden streaks. She rose slowly and crossed the hall toward the old storage room, the one they had nearly thrown away during the renovations. At the far wall stood an antique wooden cabinet, its paint chipped, its lock rusted. It was the only piece Eleanor had kept through the years. Amy remembered reading somewhere that Eleanor used to keep her lesson plans and student drawings in there. Some of those papers had survived the fire, charred at the edges, but still legible, full of names written in children's handwriting. Amy brushed her hand over the cabinet's surface. The wood was warm from the day's sun, its texture rough but familiar. From her pocket, she pulled out a small brass plaque sheet had engraved earlier that week. The letters shimmered faintly in the lamplight. She held it for a moment, then gently fixed it onto the cabinet door. The words read, "In memory of Eleanor Richards, who believed that light can rise from ashes." The sound of the last nail echoed through the empty hall. Amy stepped back. Silence filled the room, not hollow, but sacred, like the world itself was holding its breath. She reached out, resting her palm against the plank, her eyes closed. "I found your candle," she whispered, "and I'll keep it burning." A soft wind stirred through the open window. Papers rustled, and for an instant it almost felt like a hand brushed her shoulder, gentle. Approving Rex, who had followed her quietly, sat down beside the cabinet, tail thumping once against the floor. His ears perked as if he, too, could sense something, a presence, a warmth that didn't belong to this world anymore. Amy smiled faintly, tears forming behind her lashes. She crouched, wrapping an arm around Rex's neck. "Let's go home, partner," she murmured. "She's finally at peace." As they turned to leave, Amy flicked off the lamp. The room fell into half-darkness, but the plaque caught the last bit of sunset, glowing softly, like a single ember refusing to die. Down the hallway, she could still hear echoes of laughter, children's voices, the sound of piano keys, life breathing through the walls. Eleanor's dream, alive again. Amy walked slowly through the main doors, pausing one last time to look back. The sign above the entrance gleamed in the dusk. Riverside Community Center, where the lost souls begin again. She smiled a quiet, knowing smile, then stepped out into the evening light. The sky was painted in hues of violet and gold. Birds crossed the horizon, the wind carrying the scent of spring. Amy tilted her head slightly upward, as if speaking to someone unseen. "Thank you," she whispered. And though the world around her was still, she could almost hear Eleanor's voice in reply, soft, kind. "And certainly you kept a light alive," Rex sparked once, his deep voice echoing through the courtyard. Noah's laughter carried from the distance. And for a moment, everything, the past, the pain, the healing, felt whole again. The candle had been lit, and this time, it would never go out. Morning sunlight spread across Riverside like a slow, golden tide. The air was alive with music, laughter, chatter, the soft hum of a violin somewhere near the courtyard. Flags fluttered in the breeze, balloons danced from the school gates. It was the opening day. After a full year of dust, sweat, and prayer, the old red brick ruin had finally become a home again. Amy stood behind a newly painted podium at the center of the courtyard. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of everything this moment carried. Children ran past her, chasing bubbles that shimmered like tiny fragments of dreams. the smell of fresh paint mixed with the sweetness of wildflowers. Somewhere, Rex spotted once, a proud, deep sound, his way of saying, "We did it." Franklin Moore stood nearby, his cane resting against his leg. He looked different, lighter somehow, as though he too had shed some invisible burden. The townspeople filled the yard. Some had hammers and paint stains still on their hands, people who had once been strangers, now part of something shared. Amy took a deep breath and stepped forward. Her voice, when it came, was steady, warm, filled with quiet strength. "1 year ago," she began, "I had $50 a child, and an old dog who refused to give up on me." The crowd fell silent. Even the wind seemed to pause. "I didn't have a plan. I didn't have hope. I just had a promise to myself, and to the people who once believed in this place." She looked out over the courtyard at the laughter, the faces, the color and life blooming where once there had only been dust and silence. "And now," she continued, her voice breaking softly, "I have more than I ever dreamed of. Not money, not walls, but faith. Faith that when you build with your heart, the world finds its way back to you." For a moment, there was no sound, then applause rippled through the crowd like rain. Frank smiled, eyes glinting beneath his old hat. He leaned closer to her when the cheering softened. "Amy," he said gently, "the real treasure you found wasn't that $5 million, it was yourself." She turned to him, tears shining in her eyes. "Maybe so," she whispered, "but I wouldn't have found her without them." Her gaze drifted toward Noah standing by the steps, helping a smaller child tie their shoelaces, and Rex, resting faithfully beside him, his fur catching the sunlight like old silver. Frank nodded, understanding more than words could say. The celebration carried on. Music filled the hall. Children's voices echoed down the corridors. The walls that had once held silence now vibrated with life. Piano notes, chalk on blackboards, the rustle of pages turning. Amy walked slowly through it all, as though trying to take a picture with her heart, one she could keep forever. When she reached the edge of the courtyard, she stopped. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in hues of amber and rose. The light fell across the school's outer wall, the same wall that had once been cracked and broken. Now, it glowed like fire. Amy smiled. Rex, sensing her stillness, rose and patted over. He lay down beside her, head resting near her feet. His breathing was slow, steady, the rhythm of peace earned through loyalty and pain. Noah joined them a moment later, sitting quietly, watching the horizon. "Mom," he said softly, "do you think this place will always be here?" Amy turned to him, her face gentle. "If we keep believing in it," she replied. "If we keep showing up even when it's hard, then yes, it will be." He nodded, his young eyes reflecting the sunset. As the camera of the mind slowly drifts back, the scene settles into stillness. The courtyard full of laughter, the flag of Riverside waving against the sky, Rex resting peacefully by Noah's side. Amy standing before the school she rebuilt from nothing, watching the sun turn its walls into gold. And then, the narrator's voice returns. Lol.com, certain. Sometimes, the greatest beginnings come from the smallest choices, a single step, a single word, and a heart that refuses to give up. The music swells softly, violins and distant piano. Amy closes her eyes, feeling the warmth of the light on her skin. She doesn't need to say anything more. The school stands behind her, alive, breathing, eternal, a monument not to wealth, but to will. And somewhere, deep inside her, she knows Eleanor's candle is still burning. Fade out. The wind carries children's laughter into the distance. Rex lifts his head once, ears pricked, as if listening to the echoes of all the souls who once called this place home. Then he lies back down, content. Every ending leaves behind a light for those brave enough to follow it home.